Königstein Castle is one of the largest mountain fortresses in Europe and is located in the Elbe Sandstone Mountains in Saxon Switzerland, above the village of Königstein in Germany. It is perched on a 9.5 hectare plateau, 240 meters above the Elbe River. People have lived here since the Bronze Age, 3,100 years ago. The outer wall is 1,800 meters long, and from the base it is up to 42 meters high, using the sandstone cliffs as additional support. At the center of the complex there is a 152.5 meter well, the deepest castle well in Europe. The fortress exists thanks to its environment. The Elbe Sandstone Mountains were created due to the uplift of ocean floors in historic times, which then, due to weathering, created the rock formations that we can see in the region today. It is the debris of a landscape which in millions of years' time will no longer exist. Part of that debris are the plateaux, and the Königstein Plateau is one of them. An ideal defensive position, located above an important trade route and close to a border that has existed since the castle was first created. There are a number of ways of getting here. One can take the Dresden S-Bahn, get off at Königstein and walk. Alternatively, there's a car park below the castle. One can then walk up the hill from here, it's a couple of kilometers, or if you don't fancy walking, you can take the shuttle bus. If one comes by coach, it's much easier. There's a large coach stop at the base of the castle. One can pick up a ticket there and enter the castle either by panoramic lift or follow the trail up, as I shall show in this film. What I shall do in this video is to tell you a little bit about the history of the castle, and at the same time as showing you what can be seen inside. I've made other films relating to this fortress and Saxon Switzerland as a whole, which may be of interest. I came here as part of my tour of Saxon Switzerland. My interest was generated by seeing some of the paintings of the region done in the 18th and 19th century, when this was popular with the wealthy. As far as the region is concerned, I think it has the best walking trails that I've seen. The scenery is spectacular, yet is accessible by bike. When I say it's got the best walking trails, I know I might upset those who are used to mountain walking, but this is just my personal opinion, and maybe there are better places to walk, but I haven't seen them yet. I travelled here by motorhome, but there are all sorts of other accommodation providers, and public transport is excellent. As we come into the castle, we cross what is called the Red Bridge, after the colour of the brickwork. It was built in 1792 as a simple wooden bridge, which could be dismantled in wartime. The bridge was replaced by a bascule bridge in 1886. The earliest written mention of a castle on the plateau can be found in the document of King Wenceslas I of Bohemia in 1233. The medieval castle belonged to the Kingdom of Bohemia. Here we can see some steps, or the remains of some steps that went up there, and there's an entrance which dates to around 1500. At the top there was a monastery built around 1516, but that would have been blocked off when the fortress was built at the end of the 16th century. The first use of the word Königstein can be found in a document of 1241, where is written the Latin words in lapide regis, on the stone of the king, or in German, Königstein. This document demarcates the borders of the Slavic districts as part of the Kingdom of Bohemia. The approach to the gate was constructed between 1729 and 1736, As you can see, it has casemates defending the entrance, and as we enter, where the entry tickets are inspected today, in previous times a similar job was done. This was where the first guard was on duty. Passing through here, we then pass over a bridge, which until 1892 was a drawbridge, which could be pulled up in times of need, which leads to the Gatehouse. Construction of the Gatehouse started in 1589, at the point where once steps led up to the foot of the plateau. It's on various levels. The cellar has embrasures for shooting out of. The upper stories were used for residential purposes. The portal was altered between 1729 and 1736, and a relief of August the Strong was added in 1910. Internal defences include a gap in the ceiling, through which stones, molten lead, very hot water, hot oil, and anything else unpleasant that defenders could lay their hands on could be thrown down on attackers. There are also other embrasures, rabbeted beams, a portcullis, an iron gateway, and a caponnière, which is a covered passage above the niche. We know that royalty visited Königstein even in those days. King and later Emperor Charles IV stayed from the 5th to the 19th of August 1359 on the Königstein plateau and signed some shipping documents. These were privileges for use of the Elbe River. The castle changed hands several times in the following years. On the 25th of April 1459, with the Treaty of Eger, the Saxon-Bohemian border was settled roughly where it is today, and Königstein passed into the hands of the Margrave of Meissen. In contrast to other constructions on plateau in Saxon Switzerland, Königstein was used by the Saxon dukes and electors for military purposes. However, it was not just used as a fortress. In 1516, Grand Georg the Bearded, a resolute opponent of the Reformation, founded a monastery on the plateau.
Can you imagine the work needed to build something like this? Apparently there were 500 people working on it, although despite that it seems to have been built quite quickly. Here we have a diorama. I think there may be one or two little mistakes. I don't think they'd be working on that central bit. I think they would have gone from the bottom upwards, and I don't think the scaffolding would have been that big either. That's just my opinion. I might be completely wrong. But imagine the work trying to pull up those stones so high, and at the top you can see they've got the treadmill and they've got a crane which will be helping them lift the stones all that distance. But the work involved, and I'm surprised that only 500 people are actually working on it. It seems to me to be an incredibly small number of people, particularly as it was finished so quickly.
The oldest surviving building is the castle chapel, built at the turn of the 12th and 13th centuries. The oldest parts of the outer walls that can be seen today date from the 14th century. The castle, from the time of Charles IV, was extended around 1500 by Duke George the Bearded by a wing and stair tower to the south, which has also been preserved in today's building. In the years 1563 to 1569,
a 152.5 meter deep well was sunk into the rock within the castle.
Until then, those living in the castle had to depend on water from cisterns and rainwater. During the construction of this well, 8 cubic meters of water had to be removed from the shaft every day, in addition to rock. This is a major engineering achievement for the time. It is still one of the deepest castle wells in Europe. Water was hauled out using a horse chin and later a treadmill. In 1871, a steam engine was installed, followed by an electric motor in 1912. It was closed in 1967 but reopened in 1998, and the museum still shows demonstration of how this technology works. The building in which the well is found, the well house, was built between 1735 and 1737, with a sandstone vaulted roof built to withstand being fired upon. A roof of granite and pounded cement resting on steel girders was introduced in 1881 to protect the well.
This is a barracks. It's one of the oldest in Germany. It dates to the end of the 16th century. And it's still in use today, maybe not as a barracks, but as a restaurant, toilets, and perhaps the other places, the other rooms are in use as well. Another barracks is there on the right. That is the end of the 19th century now. Wooden barracks, once very common, though most of them were destroyed. So it's quite a rarity to see a wooden barracks from the end of the 19th century in Germany.
Between 1589 and 1597, the castle became the strongest fortress in Saxony. However, it was not just a fortification, as Elector Christian I had his royal residence constructed within also. The hitherto still very rugged plateau was surrounded with high walls, including parapets and round observation turrets. As already mentioned, the fortress is a product of the natural environment, but it is somewhat untypical for the Renaissance period. You can see this by comparing it to other buildings built then. And maybe one could say, and maybe argue, that this building is more reminiscent of a castle which was built maybe 200 or 300 years earlier in many ways. But what this has got is the defences afforded by the plateau itself. Other construction work then included the Gatehouse with its 3-winged facade receding over the new fortress gate. Some of what we can see today was built at a later date, but standing in the gatehouse we can see how well it was defended, even assuming an assailant breaching the main entrance. The buildings above the gatehouse were residential and constructed from 1589 to 1591 and were equipped with fireplaces. The old armoury was constructed in 1594 and the guardhouse in 1598, which is today the old barracks. In 1605 the old castle in the north was rebuilt and adapted to the new buildings in the south above the gate. In 1622 the Magdalenberg was built as a freestanding residential building with an elongated floor plan, and in 1631 the Johannissaal as a ballroom over the gate. From 1722 to 1725, August the Strong had a wine barrel built in the basement of the Magdalenberg. This is the largest wine barrel in the world, or was at the time, and it had a capacity of 249,838 litres. The costs amounted to 8,230 thaler, 18 groschen and 9 pfennigs. The barrel, which was only filled once completely with wine, had to be replaced in 1818. Throughout its history, work was always going on in the castle and buildings changed use. Built in 1631, the Johannissaal was rebuilt in 1816 to become the new arsenal. In 1819, the Magdalenberg was converted into a food warehouse, which was fortified to protect it from shelling. The old provisions store was set up as a barracks. The treasure house was built from 1854 to 1855. After the fortress was integrated into the fortress system of the new German Reich in 1871, battery shafts with 8-gun positions were built from 1870 to 1895, which should have served to defend the fortress in the event of an attack. These were also the last extensive construction works on the fortress. The fortress played a significant role in Saxony's history, albeit not for military events. The Saxon dukes and electors used the fortress primarily as a safe haven in wartime, as a hunting and pleasure palace, and also as a state prison. The actual military importance was rather low. During the 7 Years' War in 1756, Elector Friedrich August could only watch helplessly from Königstein as his army was outmaneuvered and forced to surrender without a fight to the Prussian army at the foot of the Lilienstein on the other side of the Elbe. Without any doubt, this must be one of the most powerful fortresses in Europe. But how good was it when it really counted? Well, let's see. The 7 Years' War started and the Prussians invaded Saxony. The Saxons were held on the plateau where I am now. One end hinged on Pirna, the other end was hinged here at Königstein. The Prussians, however, were content just to besiege the place, stop the Saxons getting off this plateau, at the same time as the Saxons were running out of food. The Saxons tried to make a break for it. They dismantled a pontoon bridge which is at Pirna, brought it down here, although the Prussians saw what they were doing, sank some of the barges en route. The Saxons managed to make a pontoon bridge. They got their troops the other side over there, leaving the Elector here in his castle, but the Prussians had blocked them off over there. Beyond them were the Austrians, allied to the Saxons, but they were unable to assist. The result was the castle had to surrender. The Prussians accepted the castle being neutral, the Saxon army was destroyed. Not a particularly good result. In August 1813, the Battle of Kreuzschwitz was fought nearby, which was an important preliminary to the Battle of Kulm and the Battle of Leipzig, which arguably was the battle that sealed the fate of Napoleon. The fortress played no part in the Prussian-Austrian War of 1866, when Saxony was on the losing side, and found itself incorporated into Bismarck's Reich. By this time, of course, the military importance had been lost due to the development of long-range guns. The last commander of Königstein was Lieutenant Colonel Heinecke, who held the job until 1913. One of the roles of the fortress was that of holding the Saxon state treasury and secret archive during wartime. Dresden art treasures were also stored at Königstein, which also happened during the Second World War, when the extensive casemates of the fortress were used for such purposes. Whereas the fortress was never taken, Saxony found itself on the losing side of various wars. It is of course somewhat difficult to question the role of any fortress, particularly one like this which is located close to a border and above all an important trade route. Only one person ever managed to break in. This was a chimney sweep called Sebastian Abratsky, who climbed the outer wall in 1848. Today, climbing the outer wall is forbidden, so no one is likely to beat Sebastian's record. The fortress was until 1922 the most famous state prison in Saxony. It was also used as a POW camp during the Franco-Prussian War and the two World Wars. In World War I it housed French and Russian officers. From 1939 to 1945, Polish, French, British, Dutch and American prisoners of war were interned here, with the camp being run as Oflag 4B. A number of French generals were held in the fortress, such as Bertrand Valgard, who after the war was accused and later acquitted of having collaborated with the enemy whilst he was at Königstein. The accusation was that he'd offered to fight in the ranks of the SS against the Soviet Union, but later rescinded the offer when he found out that he would have to fight in German uniform and not in French. General Gustav Mesne was taken prisoner in the Lille pocket in 1940. On 28th of October 1944, the German general Fritz von Bordowski was shot whilst in French captivity. On 8th and 9th of November 1944, Swiss and British media announced that General von Brodowski had participated in the Oradour-sur-Glane massacre. The German High Command came to the conclusion that this was an illegal act of revenge, as no trial had been held, and requested the death of a French general. Hitler ordered Wilhelm Keitel to send a list of French generals imprisoned at Königstein and decided that General Dubois be executed in retribution. Colonel Friedrich Meurer, Inspector General assigned to prisoners of war, decided that too many German civil servants knew that General Dubois was to be killed, so he arbitrarily chose General Mesne. On 19th of January 1945, two members of the SS, wearing Wehrmacht uniform, collected Mesne, saying that he was to be transferred to the POW camp Oflag 4C at Colditz. En route, General Mesne was shot in the neck near Nossen. General Alphonse Schwamm was taken prisoner in the Lille pocket during the retreat to Dunkirk and spent around 18 months in the fortress. He was released on 15th of June 1941 as a result of negotiations between the Vichy and Berlin governments, and within a month became a general in the Vichy army. Posted to North Africa, he changed sides following Operation Torch and is one of the names most associated with the liberation of France in 1944. General Charles Mast was planning to escape when on 21st of September 1941 he learned that he was to be released. As part of the Vichy army in Algiers, he was in contact with American and British intelligence to facilitate the Anglo-American landings in North Africa in November 1942. However, of all French generals present here, it is General Henri Giraud who is the most famous, and that is because of his escape in April 1942. The escape was particularly daring, using self-made ropes to lower himself down a wall, an amazing feat for someone aged 63 who had never before done any climbing. Giraud had earlier been allowed out of the fortress under guard using the parole system, and he used this to study the lie of the land. Whilst imprisoned, he learnt German and allegedly talked to an SS officer whilst on the train towards Switzerland, although I find it somewhat hard to believe that he could speak the language without an accent. That's the sort of thing you see in films. In real life, it doesn't work that way. Anyway, Giraud was the only person ever to escape from the castle, and I shall look at his escape in more detail in another film. After the Second World War, the Red Army used the fortress as a military hospital. From 1949 to 1955, it was used by the GDR authorities to intern young people. On the 29th of May 1955, the Ministry of Culture of the German Democratic Republic took over Königstein and declared it a museum, although parts continued to be used for civil defence, which meant the installation of an emergency generator, ventilation, waterworks and gas-tight doors. From 1967 to 1970, a 42-person lift was installed. This elevator stops at the restaurant and the casemates and can carry up to 4.5 tons. In 1991, the Königstein fortress became the property of the Free State of Saxony and has since been extensively renovated. In 2005, a second elevator was built on a vertical outer wall of the fortress, transporting a maximum of 18 passengers in a panoramic lift to a height of about 42 meters. At the foot, there's a covered waiting area. The state of Saxony provided 1.7 million euros for the construction. At Easter 2006, the panoramic elevator started operation. Altogether, between 1991 and 2017, the Free State of Saxony invested about 66 million euros in the renovation and expansion of the Königstein facilities. Since the year 2000, the museum has worked as a limited company, and since 2003 with a charitable status. Since its opening, an average of 500,000 visitors has come to the Königstein fortress each year. The fortress presents itself to visitors as a military, historical, open-air museum with numerous interior, permanent and special exhibitions. Among other things, the Military History Museum of the Bundeswehr Dresden is present in the two arsenals with military history exhibitions. There's a permanent exhibition which can be seen at Königstein called In Lapide Regis, on the stole of the king, which tells the story of the nearly 800 years history of the fortifications from the beginnings through the Middle Ages to the present day. This exhibition in the Torhaus and Strijkwehr comprises 33 rooms, some of which became accessible to the public for the first time when this exhibition was opened. For me, it's a great day out. It's a full day out. I was there before it opened, as I always am, or nearly always am, and I was one of the last people out. In fact, when I left, the door was already closed, so I had to let myself out, as can be seen in the film. It's a wonderful construction. From an engineering point of view, it's quite magnificent, and the explanations of everything around it are also quite wonderful. So I thoroughly recommend it, as I thoroughly recommend Saxon Switzerland, and you can see why I thoroughly recommend Saxon Switzerland in other films which I have or will publish.
Thought it might have been locked in.